So that's the concept behind working with this outline stroke command here. You saw it used on a squiggly line, and you also saw it used on a very basic shape here. Now, where would you actually use this here? Well, I'll give you a couple of quick examples here, and then we'll actually go and use this on some of our artwork here in this file. So if you have any shapes that you've created here, you can delete them. And I want to show you a little trick here. I'm going to go and create two very basic shapes here again. I'll just press D on my keyboard here to fill it with the default fill and the default stroke here. And if you want, you can use a different fill color here. And I'll go and create a second shape here. Fill it with a second color. Now the important thing that I'd like you to do here, if you are following along, is set it up so that each of your shapes has a different stroke weight on it. So my orange oval here only has a 1-point stroke on it, so I'm going to crank that up a little bit. And my blue rectangle here, let's crank that up a little bit more. I'll go up to 8 on that one. So you can see a big difference between the two shapes here. Now, one problem that I've had in Illustrator, you may have run into this as well, is when I'm trying to align shapes that have a different stroke weight on them. I'll show you exactly what I mean. In fact, I drew my shapes a little bit too small here, so I'll just zoom in a little bit closer here so we can see what's happening. Go ahead and select your two shapes, and either using your Align palette or your Align options up on your control bar, go ahead and align the left sides of your objects here. And just by looking here, I can tell that the left sides of my objects are not lined up. I'll take this second guy here and actually reduce the stroke weight just a touch so you can see, sure enough, they are definitely not lined up. In fact, if I turn on my rulers, Control R or Command R on the Mac, and drag out a guide and line up the edge of that guide to the edge of the stroke on the blue rectangle, you can see, sure enough, they are not lined up. So what's going on? I used Illustrator's left align command and it didn't work. So what's going on? Well, I'm going to switch over to my preview mode just for a second here. And the align command did work actually. If I drag out another guide here, you can see that the left edges of the paths line up, but the left edges of the strokes do not line up. So in other words, the align commands in Illustrator are lining up paths and are not taking into account the amount of stroke weight that's applied to a particular object. So what do you do about this? I'm going to go back to my preview mode, by the way, here. And here's what we can do. First of all, I'm going to turn off my guides here. I'm just going to hit Control semicolon or Command semicolon on the Mac. And rather than working with regular strokes here, what I can do is take the strokes on these two objects and convert them to fills. And then Illustrator will take the edges of those paths and help me line up my objects. I'll show you exactly what I mean here. So I'm going to take my first object here. I'll go to Object and then down to Path and then Outline Stroke. There's the first one. Remember, they're grouped, the fill and the black frame here, the former stroke here. I'll do the exact same thing on my oval here. Object, Path, Outline Stroke. There we are. I'll take both shapes and line up the left sides again. And you can see, sure enough, because the strokes are now filled objects, Illustrator knows to line them up. So that's one quick example of where I've used this in the past. So where else might we use this? Well, hit Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to head all the way back out. And where you might use this command is when you want to use a gradient on a path. Now we have this little sound effect up towards the top here. We want to put a gradient on these squiggly lines here that appear above and below our sound effect. So go ahead and zoom in on that area there. There we are. And first of all, you might have known this already, or maybe this is new for you, but in Illustrator you cannot put a gradient on a path. And I'll show you this here. I'm going to switch over in my toolbox so that my stroke is on top. And I'll grab my swatches palette here. And if I try and apply a gradient here, Illustrator won't let me. Well, it'll let me, but it throws it into the fill here. I don't want it on the fill, I want it on the stroke. So what can we do about this? Well, Illustrator's not letting me put this gradient on this path here, so to heck with it, what I'm going to do is take this path, convert it to a filled object, and then apply my lovely gradient to the object here. So I have my squiggly lines selected here. I'll go up to Object, and then down to Path, and then to my Outline Stroke command. There it is. And then I'm going to apply my gradient. Now I created a gradient here for you in the swatches palette, and haha, there it is there. So I just trumped Illustrator there. I took my path and I converted it to a filled object, and I got the result that I wanted. There it is there. Of course, because this is now a filled object, I could take it here, for example, and put a stroke on it. So in other words, I started with a stroke, I converted it to a filled object, and then I put a stroke back on it. Now, we have lots and lots of practice here to get this down. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to speed things up a little bit. I'm going to grab all of my squiggly lines across the top here, and also all of my squiggly lines across the bottom. There they are. Whoop, missed one on the end there. And I'm going to do them all in one shot. Object, down to Path, Outline Stroke. There they are. And I want to apply the same gradient fill and the stroke that I have on my first guy here. The fast way to do that is just to use my eyedropper tool. So I'll grab my eyedropper tool, single click on my first squiggly line, and there we are. There's all of my squiggly lines now with the gradient and with the same stroke that I applied to them.